8 years ago, the truth about my husband, Peter, shattered everything I thought I knew about our life together. I had always been the faithful wife, dedicated to my family, my students, and my craft as a high school art teacher. Peter, on the other hand, had always been the charming, ambitious man who seemed to promise a future built on mutual respect and understanding. Or so I thought. I discovered that Peter had been unfaithful to me for nearly a year, carrying on an affair with one of his college friends, a woman who had once been a familiar face at our dinner table. The realization came to me in the most gut-wrenching way possible, a phone call, a confession, and the cold, empty silence that followed. Peter had never been the easiest man to live with. He'd long been resentful of my career. Art, according to him, wasn't a real job, just a hobby. My modest salary as a teacher had always seemed to fall short of his expectations, and the cracks in our marriage had grown deeper and wider over the years. Our once vibrant love had withered into an almost invisible thread, one tugged by the weight of unspoken disappointments and growing distance. His affair, however, was the final nail in the coffin. I could never forgive him for betraying me in such a personal way, not after everything we had built together. Moving out of our home was my first step toward reclaiming some sense of control. The decision to file for divorce came quickly after that. We had already been drifting apart, but the affair left me with no illusion that there was anything left worth saving. I filed the papers, and our marriage, once filled with dreams of a shared future, was gone. Our 2 children, Lucas and Sophia, had already left for their own lives, and although I had hoped they would side with me, the truth was more painful than I could have anticipated. When it came time to divide our lives, they chose Peter. They claimed they understood his frustration and justified his actions as the result of a failing marriage and his own dissatisfaction with his career. I tried to make them understand my pain, but their words felt hollow. They painted me as the one to blame, suggesting that I had driven their father to seek solace elsewhere. My heart broke as I watched them defend him, even as they stood on the other side of a chasm that had formed between us. Over the next few years, I found myself becoming more isolated. My attempts to reach out to Lucas and Sophia fell on deaf ears. They didn't call on my birthday, they didn't invite me to their weddings, and they never shared any of the milestones in their lives with me. It was as if I had ceased to exist in their world, and in many ways, I had to learn to live without them. Peter, for his part, wasted no time in remarrying his affair partner, a woman who had already been a part of our lives in the most intimate way possible. Their wedding took place only 2 months after our divorce, and I watched from a distance as they built a life that was everything I had once dreamed of, except now, it was without me. In the wake of the divorce, I threw myself into work. I wasn't sure what else to do, so I focused on building something of my own. With 2 close friends, I opened a creative arts center for children, and much to my surprise, it took off. The community embraced it, and the children who attended found a place where they could express themselves freely and joyfully. Over time, the center grew, and my life started to feel full again. The ache of my broken family remained, but I had a new purpose, and that made the pain more bearable. Then, earlier this year, something unexpected happened. Lucas and Sophia reappeared in my life. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, maybe just a holiday greeting or a quick visit. But the conversation was different this time. There were no questions about my health, no interest in my work, it was all about Peter. And then, they told me about their financial troubles. The company Peter and his wife had started was faltering. The business they had built together was struggling to stay afloat, and Lucas and Sophia, who had climbed the ranks within the company, were now at risk of losing everything. Their eyes told me everything I needed to know. They didn't care about family, about healing old wounds. They were only here because they needed something I had, something I could give them. I didn't hesitate. I confronted them. "You think you can just waltz back into my life and expect me to help you?" I demanded. They denied it at first, swearing that they were there to mend our relationship, that their children, my grandchildren, needed me. But I didn't believe them. I had learned to trust my instincts, and my instincts told me they were after one thing: money. Nothing more. I blocked them. I needed space. I wasn't ready to let them back in, not when their motives were so painfully clear. But they didn't give up. A few days later, I received an email. It was long, filled with apologies, with explanations, with confessions. They admitted that their selfishness had cost them more than they could ever understand, and they apologized for the way they had treated me all these years. They acknowledged their mistakes, their greed, and their inability to see beyond their own struggles. They were sorry, and they asked if I would consider forgiving them. I sat with those words for days. It wasn't easy to forgive them, not after everything they had done. But as I read their email again and again, I saw something I hadn't expected: genuine regret. They weren't just asking for forgiveness because they needed money, they were asking for it because they needed me. They wanted to rebuild what had been lost. They wanted to introduce me to my grandchildren, to allow me to be a part of their lives again. I couldn't ignore the sincerity in their words. I knew that forgiveness was a long road, but perhaps we could start somewhere. I responded, agreeing to meet them. But I made it clear that I would not be investing in their failing business. That wasn't why I was opening the door again. I wanted to reconnect, not to be used. The dinner was awkward at first. I could feel the tension in the room, the weight of the years of silence and hurt between us. But as the evening wore on, something miraculous happened. They were different. They weren't the self-absorbed children I remembered. They had grown up, and they had learned hard lessons along the way. The conversation was no longer about money, or Peter, or the past. It was about the future, and the possibility of healing. Meeting my grandchildren for the first time was a bittersweet moment. Their faces were unfamiliar, yet their smiles held a warmth that reminded me of everything I had lost. They were innocent in all of this, caught in the web of a family that had once been whole but had become so fractured over time. As I held them in my arms, I realized that there was something worth fighting for, something more precious than the pain of the past. In the days that followed, I cautiously allowed Lucas and Sophia back into my life. We began to rebuild our relationship slowly, piece by piece. Trust didn't come easily, and there were moments when I doubted whether it would ever fully return. But I knew that if there was a chance to heal, it was worth pursuing. The road ahead is still uncertain. There are days when the weight of the past feels unbearable, and there are moments when I wonder if the fractures will ever truly heal. But one thing is clear: I am no longer alone. The family I thought I had lost is slowly returning, and with them, the possibility of redemption. For the first time in years, I feel hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of something new. Something I never thought I would see again. And I'm willing to walk this uncertain path, if not for myself, then for the sake of my grandchildren and the love that still lingers beneath the surface of a broken family. As the months passed, I found myself navigating a delicate balance between hope and caution. Rebuilding trust wasn't something that could happen overnight, and it wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when old wounds resurfaced, when I would catch myself questioning their motives or wondering if I was being naive. But something in me told me to keep going, to give them the chance to prove themselves. After all, they had taken the first step, something they hadn't done in 8 years. Lucas and Sophia made an effort. They attended family gatherings, invited me to their children's birthdays, and slowly began to weave me back into their lives. For the first time in a long while, I was included, not as an afterthought, but as someone who truly mattered. I could see it in the way they looked at me, the way they sought my advice, the way they tried to make amends for the pain they had caused. Their children, my grandchildren, were like little rays of light, and I found myself enveloped in their innocence and joy. I couldn't deny the warmth I felt when they ran to me with their drawings or asked me to tell them stories of my life. It was a gift I hadn't known I needed. But there were still dark days. There were moments when I would catch myself staring at Peter's name on the occasional family email or glance at his face in a photograph. His presence loomed, despite everything. I couldn't completely shake the feeling that he still had some hold over me, even from a distance. And then there was his wife, my former friend, whose name seemed to hover in the background of every conversation. She had been the one to destroy everything, and I often found myself resenting her more than I resented him. I struggled with the idea of forgiving her, or whether that was even necessary for my own peace. Peter, for his part, didn't make things any easier. After our divorce, I had hoped to never hear from him again, but he found ways to insert himself into my life. He'd send me occasional texts, usually nothing more than updates about the kids or the business. Sometimes I'd hear from him through mutual acquaintances, and he'd always ask how I was doing, like nothing had ever happened. He never directly acknowledged the affair, the hurt, or the destruction he caused. It made my stomach churn. His ability to act as if everything was fine only reminded me of the man he'd become, the man I had once loved but could no longer recognize. One evening, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by the laughter of my grandchildren and the quiet murmur of conversation between Lucas and Sophia. They were no longer the children who had turned their backs on me all those years ago, they were grown adults who had learned from their mistakes, who had lived through the consequences of their own decisions. They had changed. I could see it in their eyes, in the way they took responsibility for their past actions, and in the way they were willing to rebuild the broken pieces of our family. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the gnawing ache of loneliness that had once consumed me. But still, I struggled with the idea of truly forgiving Peter. The years of betrayal, the lies, the heartbreak, they had carved deep scars into my heart. I knew that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened, it was about releasing myself from the grip of the past. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure I ever would be. Then, one fateful evening, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Peter. I hesitated before opening it, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. As I read his words, I was struck by their simplicity. He didn't offer excuses, nor did he try to justify his actions. Instead, he acknowledged the pain he had caused, the years he had wasted, and the fact that he had lost everything that had once been dear to him. He apologized for his selfishness, for betraying my trust, and for the way he had hurt our family. And then, at the end of the letter, he asked me for one final thing: forgiveness. I sat with the letter for a long time, unsure of how to respond. I had spent so many years building walls around myself to protect my heart, and now, those walls were starting to crumble. I knew that forgiving Peter wouldn't change the past, but it could change the future. I could choose to let go of the bitterness and pain, or I could continue to hold on to the anger that had defined so much of my life. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew what I had to do. I needed to forgive him, not for his sake, but for mine. I couldn't allow his actions to have any more power over my happiness. So, I wrote him a letter in return. It was simple, and it wasn't filled with grand gestures or promises of reconciliation. But it was honest. I told him that I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to release myself from the weight of the past. I told him that while our relationship could never be the same, I was willing to allow him a place in my life, if only in the most distant way. I didn't need him to be a part of my present, but I could find a way to make peace with the past. The process of healing wasn't swift, and it wasn't linear. There were days when I felt the pull of the old wounds, when I questioned whether forgiveness was the right choice. But as time went on, I realized that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean allowing someone to hurt you again. It simply meant choosing to live without the constant burden of resentment. Life moved forward, and the distance between Lucas, Sophia, and me slowly narrowed. We began to share more moments, small ones, like a quiet cup of coffee or a walk in the park. They were no longer the children who had abandoned me. They were adults who had learned from their mistakes and who were now trying to rebuild what had been lost. And while I knew we could never fully erase the past, I saw glimpses of the family we could become. In the end, I realized that rebuilding a family isn't always about erasing the past or pretending it didn't happen. It's about acknowledging the pain, learning from it, and finding a way to move forward. It's about showing up for one another, even when the road is rocky, and making the choice to embrace the future with open arms. The journey is far from over, but I am no longer defined by the hurt that once consumed me. I am stronger now, wiser, and more willing to let go of the things that no longer serve me. And as I look around at the faces of my children and grandchildren, I know that, despite everything we've been through, there is still love. There is still hope. And for the first time in years, there is peace. And in that peace, I can finally say that I've found a place to heal. If you enjoyed this thrilling journey, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on the latest content. Share this story with your friends, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay tuned for more suspenseful adventures.